Catalyst Groups. I hope you're well this evening. Glad you could meet together. I want to pose a question here before we start our conversation. Something that I've been wrestling with for as long as I can remember, and something that I'll continue to struggle with and submit to the Lord until the day I die. Um, what is my identity? What is your identity? Where does our identity begin and come from? Who are we? Where do I start? What has formed who I am? I want to share with you a little bit of my story, how I grew up, what my journey so far has looked like. Um, I do a lot of things. Um, I've done a lot of things. I grew up in church. I became a believer when I was 7 years old. All my family were believers. We were missionaries. We lived overseas. I've always been involved in worship, on worship teams, either playing percussion or drums, and in high school learning to sing and play the guitar, and started to lead worship for our youth group when I was a junior in high school, and lead worship at the school I went to during the lunch worship time we had, and a chapel we had during the week, and um, I played drums on the weekend for this church of 3,000 often, about 2 to 3 weeks a month. I would drum, and while my dad was leading worship, and my mom was playing piano, and I loved it. I enjoyed it. It kind of created part of who I am as a musician. I even got to lead worship a few times. That was exciting as this 16, 17-year-old junior and senior getting to lead worship in front of 3,000 people. Wow. I mean, that's kind of fun. That's kind of impressive, you know. Pride, yeah. It seeps in slowly. But I began to develop some, and I didn't notice it at first. And when I did notice it, I tried to cover it up with false humility. Then I moved to China as a worship leader at a church in Beijing for 3 years. The first two, I interned under my dad, actually, who was leading worship at the church, and it was a time of intentional training for me. And then after 2 years of serving and overextending myself a lot and saying yes to way too much, but yet getting a lot of experience and a lot of time in the spotlight. During that third year, I had done enough good and done a good enough job that the church asked, "Hey, we'd like to pay you. Would you like to come back on staff and serve as the worship leader for this church?" By the way, this church was also about 3,000 people strong and over 60 countries represented. It was a beautiful place. It was fascinating. So I said yes. So I did, and it was a wonderful time. That whole last year of me living in China, I developed more as a worship leader. I did a lot as well. I led worship, and then God was doing some incredible things. God does incredible things in His church. But I thought that somehow God was doing things based on what I was doing. And that kind of shaped who I thought God was. I knew who I was. I was a worship leader because I did worship leading type things. And I started to redefine who God was even in my mind, how He acted and who He was. I moved back to Colorado Springs after living in China for those 3 years. I got married. I started working full-time at a church in Colorado Springs as an associate worship leader. I did everything from the administrative side of things to leading once to twice a month, and helped out a lot. Well, it wasn't too long after I moved back, had this job, had a new wife, that my throat started to hurt after I would sing, and it began I began to experience pain. And so I went to the doctor, and he put a scope down my throat, and when it came back up, he looked at me and said, "Daniel, you have a very angry-looking throat." I said, "What?" He said, "It looks like you've smoked 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes every day of your every day for the past 3.5 years." And I'd been living in Beijing, and it was the pollution. He said, "There's damage on your vocal cords and on your larynx. There's a chance you might not be able to sing anymore." This whole dream, this whole identity, this whole tower of me that I had created and lived in over the past years began to shake. And I began to say, "Why, God, would you do something like this to me? I'm a worship leader. I have to have my voice to be who I am." God said, "No, you don't." And the way He taught me that and began to teach me that was about 6 months later, after I'd tried to heal my own throat and trying different techniques of singing, but not seeing much improvement. And one of the leaders in the church approached me and said, "Hey, we've been praying. We have a need in the youth department. We'd like you to pray and consider becoming our middle school pastor." And I immediately told him to his face, "No." Why? Because I'm a worship leader. I don't do youth work. I've done that. I've been burned out on that. I don't really like kids. I'm stuck in my ways. I'm prideful. All these are thoughts that are going through my mind. But he asked me to pray about it, and after I had laughed about it to my wife that night on the way home, and when she didn't laugh in return and did encourage me to pray about it, I realized this probably is something I need to pray about. There's an issue I need to deal with here. And so I did pray about it and realized, and I'm still realizing today, that so often in life, daily at times, I flip my identity around on its head. You see, where does my identity come from? Where does your identity come from? Well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And then for the rest of chapter 1 in the book of Genesis, page 1 of your Bibles, God spoke and created. God spoke and stars appeared, and the sun and the moon, and seasons on the earth existed, and vegetation and oceans and land were separated, and animals were created, and everything that we see and feel today was created. And God said, "This is good." And then he said, "Let us make man in our image. In the likeness of God, let us make man and woman." And then in Genesis 2, verse 7, there's a distinction made in creation. See, God spoke everything into existence. But then when God created Adam, he formed Adam out of the dust of the earth. Now, forming something, you use your hands. God formed Adam, and he breathed the breath of life into his lungs, and he became a living being. Adam's identity had nothing to do with what he had done. Adam's identity was based on the fact that God is creator. God is love, and God chose to express his love and his glory by creating everything. God did something. God created Adam in his image. And he tasked Adam with an action of continue in a relationship with me and steward what I've given to you. Take care of the garden I've placed you in. And then when he created Eve, he said, "Be fruitful and multiply. Create more image bearers, more people who have an identity that's based on who I am." Then Adam and Eve were tempted. The fall happened. The deceiver, the one who comes to steal and kill and destroy, came to steal God's glory, to kill their lives and destroy their hope and their identity. He says, "You can be like God. Just disobey this one command." So Adam and Eve became dissatisfied with their God-given image-bearer identity and wanted to be more powerful, more wise, more strong, more knowledgeable. And so they ate and they sinned. And when they disobeyed the one command God had given them, when they walked away from their calling and their identity, sin stained their soul. And because God is holy, and what he does as a result of his holiness, when he's in the presence of sin, he distances himself from it. He separates himself from it. He said, "There's going to be a curse now on you, and that curse is death, because the curse of sin is death. And I am full of life, and sin only leads to death. So we can't be together. You've destroyed our relationship. You're still valuable. You still carry worth, but you destroyed our relationship." And so God sent them out of the garden. If we stopped there, identity would be forever destroyed, and hope would be forever lost, and we would say, "Wow, God's just mean." But the gospel, the root of my identity, the root of your identity, the root of where we find our identity, is that John 3:16 so simply and eloquently and profoundly puts this, that God flips the boxes, the blocks, the order of how we do things around, and says, "No, I am so full of love, and I so love the people of this world, the broken image bearers of this world, that I'm going to send Jesus. I'm going to come down, take on flesh, and dwell among you, breathe the same oxygen, live the same life, feel the same ground beneath your feet, be tempted as you are, but yet walk without sin, so that you, who are broken, when you, by my grace, put your faith and your trust in the finished work of Jesus on the cross, your identity can be restored and made new. New creations, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5. And our response to that, to the power of the gospel, to the power of the identity maker and restorer, is that we now respond by living lives filled with worship, by knowing Christ deeper and making him known, by loving God and loving people, as Jesus said is the base commandment, the greatest commandment, by fulfilling the commission that he's given us and invited us to join in with him in, of going to the nations and making disciples. Where does my identity begin? The story I told, and this is honest, was this way. My identity was based on this. Your identity today may be based on the fact that you do something, or you are someone, or you have certain attributes. Porneia, the pain of porneia, is so identity driven. You see, Nate just talked about singleness and sexuality on Sunday. How a lot of times when we're single, for those of you who are single, there's this feeling that you're not measuring up because you're not married. Well, that's not true. Why? That's an action-based identity. Just because you haven't found someone to marry yet, God hasn't led you to someone, or if you remain single your whole life, that's not giving you your value or your worth. God's called you to that. And if you're married, your value and your worth isn't based in that either. What if marriage ends? What if your spouse dies or divorces you? Well, then if you base your identity and your understanding of life, your worldview on that, everything comes crumbling down. No. Because of the gospel, because of God, our identity is because of who God is. It's founded on him. So when your struggles with porneia, and your struggles with identity, and your struggles with parenting, with knowing what to do, keep God as the foundation. Investigate God's word and figure out who is God, what has he done, who am I in light of that, and now what has he called me to do? How has he called me to respond? Where is my identity? Where is your identity? It's on God. Flip the boxes around. Get the correct order to your search for identity.